We lawyers have an ethical, legal, and even a moral obligation to counsel you on the opportunity to take the file out of our hands and entrust the entire negotiation process to a mediator. No lawyers, less money spent, less fighting. Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? The reality is that mediation is a valuable tool rooted in all the things that are good about conflict resolution. But for reasons I'll explain in this video, mediation, it's not right for everyone. People are inclined to settle, and the majority of files do settle out of court. To settle a file, it calls for compromise. It calls for empathy. It calls for open-mindedness. It calls for listening to the people that are part of the discussion. It calls for knowledge, knowledge of the law, knowledge of the other side, knowledge of oneself. It requires time. It requires borders where people can act appropriately. It requires rules. When you're looking at a negotiation, there's a bit of a power play that comes into effect. Power. That's an interesting word. Power means that someone's exercising power. And there are two ways to exercise power. You can exercise power over someone, which means that you're imposing your will, you're being intimidating or threatening, coercive, or you can empower someone. You can choose to give them a sense of yourself, to elevate them. And there's something very selfless about empowerment. Is your spouse actively stopping you from using a lawyer? Because when you introduce a lawyer, the power play is imbalanced. The power that spouse often enjoyed can be gone. Think of abuse in the household. One of the hallmarks of abuse is concealment. The less people are allowed into the inner circle, the more they're allowed to roam free. People are a threat because they bring awareness. The lawyer brings defense, and when needed, a counterattack. Something that obviously doesn't sit well with the power over spouse. So if your spouse is a power over spouse, mediation may not be the best choice, because the mediator cannot always intervene to create the balance that's required to settle fairly. The mediator may not be in a position to quell the power over dynamic. It's not even necessarily the mediator's role to do so. So you may find yourself during the mediation hoping that the mediator will help you. You're waiting anxiously for that relief when the power over dynamic occurs. That alone is anxiety inducing. Bringing in a lawyer doesn't mean that you're fighting. It's the mechanism that you can use to settle. And don't get me wrong, I'm a huge proponent of mediation, but you need the right ingredients to settle through a mediator. You also need the right ingredients to settle with a lawyer. It's still our primary focus. A judge, when you come into trial, will often remind you, are you really sure that you want me, a judge who doesn't know you, doesn't know your children, to impose decisions that are going to be dictating how you raise your kids, at what time they're going to be picked up, how much money you're supposed to be spending on them, who gets them and when, and the list goes on and on. You are best suited to decide. Quebec has settlement conferences with a judge. Those are wonderful tools, and they're efficient to get the parties in a room with their lawyers and a judge whose sole purpose is to listen to the conflict between the parties and to try and mediate to get them to a settlement. The settlement conference is not binding. It means that you don't have to get into that room and do a deal. But the beauty of the settlement conference is that you're assisted by your lawyer. You have ample time to discuss the various components of the case. And you have a judge in that room who says, if I happen to be the judge hearing your case, this is how I would have ruled. And the mechanism for a settlement conference is very fluid. It can be done with all the parties in the room. The parties can caucus alone with the judge, who can then shuttle back and forth between both rooms to see whether or not they can broker an agreement. The judge is presiding over these negotiations, and that judge has moral authority that is present in that room. And that moral authority is something that lawyers and even a mediator may lack. If you have any questions regarding mediation, settlement, or anything concerning family law, you can please leave a comment and I'll be happy to answer you, or you can call me anytime and I'll be happy to speak to you. Until then, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.